So, yeah, I'm really happy to be here because I think my work is really aligned with the theme of this weekend, which seems to me to be about how maps are stories in themselves, but they're also really powerful platforms for sharing stories, and how stories themselves are also maps in the sense that they offer a kind of blueprint of where we've come from, where we are, and where we want to go, which I think is really relevant to the commoning theme. So I'll give you, I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction and then quite a bit of context, because this is quite a lengthy story. The story of the struggle of the people of Xolobeni has been going on for near on a couple of decades now, and it took me about 2 or 3 years just to learn enough about it to be able to write sort of my first article about it, because it is so complex and has such a strong vein of post-colonialism and anti-capitalism and alternatives and state capture and corruption and all of those things. So I should also say that I really kind of stumbled into inquiry around commoning. It wasn't a theme that I went into this project thinking about at all. We went into the community because we wanted to sort of address the erasure that this particular rural community was facing by the state, that has been trying with its allies in the mining sector to get its hands on the land for so long. So I was pleasantly surprised when I started, reviewing what I've done and what we've found, and it was kind of a eureka moment, like, wow, this is really all about the commons and commoning and communalism, which was quite an accident. So I am going to try and tell this with kind of a storytelling angle, because this is also how I've been collecting data and analyzing it from the community. So just to give you a little bit of context, there's also another map on the wall that shows where in the Eastern Cape this community is located. It's about a 3-kilometer stretch along some of the last remaining pristine coastline on the African continent, not just in South Africa. It is extremely rich in biodiversity and endemic species, and more species are being cataloged by botanists really regularly still. And this is in part due to the area's status as a former designated homeland under apartheid, where the white Dutch nationalist rulers sort of allocated vast swathes of the country as places where black people could live, and everywhere else was for white people. And this was in part also to create large pools of cheap, exploitable migrant labor. And in these areas, they were appointed traditional leaders. There's kind of a myth about this idea of traditional leaders as being, really representative of rural peoples. They're not at all. They were appointed by the apartheid state to do the state's bidding. So that is quite problematic, and there's quite a history of mistrust of traditional leaders. And that's not to say that it's a really simple governance system. There are some traditional leaders who do a good job and are trusted and are considered representative of the people's wishes, but for the most part, that's not the case. So the Amadiba Crisis Committee was formed in 2007 in immediate response to finding out that the state had granted permission to explore the titanium sands of the coastal area without any community awareness at all of these developments. And this is important because South Africa is one of the only countries in the world that has a constitution that guarantees the right of its citizens. This is very important since 1994, to participate in development and to shape their own development futures and trajectories. So this community has waged a battle for much longer than a decade, leveraging mainstream and social media, networks, using protest, and often using their physical bodies to block exploration equipment. Even today, I think last week, the National Roads Agency sent engineers uninvited onto customary land to try and sort of put the pegs in for this contested N2 coastal highway, which is directly linked to the mining program. The state will deny it, and does deny it still until they're blue in the face, but there's actually like a lot of documentary evidence out there that says, the mine can't go ahead without the road, and so everybody knows it, although the corrupt mining officials continue to deny it. So this is called the N2 coastal route, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And the Amityville Crisis Committee is also supported in their struggles by an amazing firm of attorneys, human rights lawyers, Richard Spoor Incorporated. And with Richard Spoor attorneys' help, they have managed to win 2 really significant legal battles. The first one in 2018, when the community's right to say no to mining was affirmed by the High Court of Pretoria, based on the fact that communities had not been consulted and did not consent. And then again, when Shell South Africa came knocking and actually began seismic testing for offshore oil and gas without permission, again, they won that interdict in, I think it was 2022, it was quite recent, forcing the oil giant to stop seismic testing, again on the grounds of failing to properly consult or gain consent from customary inhabitants. I should add, by the way, so they're in this sort of legally pluralistic setup, municipal law operates parallel alongside traditional law, but all decisions over land use and governance are taken at the community level by traditional leaders. So with each of these victories, I think the communities thought, okay, now we can start focusing on our own development plans, now that the courts are supporting us. But this hasn't been the case. These community members experience structural and physical violence on a daily basis, almost. I've never had a field visit where I haven't turned up and there's been some sort of blockade. I think the first time I went to visit the personal assistant of the sub-head woman, and she had bite marks on her arm and cuts and bruises on her head and face because there had been a secret meeting with SANRAL. The roads agency was trying to get people to sign to give permission for the road to cut through one of the villages, and the sub-head woman's assistant, her name is Nono, confronted the community members that had been in this meeting. They were actually her family members, and they attacked her with knob carries and their teeth. They also attacked her daughter while the grandchildren were there looking on. So this is sort of the scale and the frequency of the violence. And now there's increasing demand for green minerals, for titanium, especially in lithium. And I'm not a mineralogist. I don't know really exactly the details of all the metals and minerals. The sands are very rich in many of them. But it is because these minerals are so lucrative, and because the just transition sort of rhetoric and action is kicking off in the state, that so much pressure is increasing. So it doesn't matter that the courts have recognized the community's right to say no. The mining companies in the state are still coming. And the state is using increasingly underhanded tactics. So the Constitution guarantees the right to participate in mining, in development, to chart development trajectories. That's quite a formidable obstacle. So to get around that, the state has tried making up various new laws. One of them is called the Traditional and Khoisan Peoples Act. That was tabled a couple of years ago. It was actually brought into force, I think, very recently last year. And the problem with that bill is that it was touted as something that would give Indigenous leaders more power to develop their own communities. But what it actually did was it gave power to state-appointed corrupt traditional leaders to sign contracts directly with mining companies without getting community consent. All they had to do was have a consultation with the community, and there are no defined terms about what constitutes acceptable or participatory or democratic consultation. That was just overturned in the Constitutional Court. So, but the state is appealing, and it's just like an endless cycle of rulings in favor of the community and appeals. And also the state wields very powerful discourses of deprivation, shouting from the rooftops that these people are poor, they need jobs, mining is the only alternative. And this is a position that the community rejects unequivocally. They say, we are rich, we have land, we can sustain ourselves, we don't need mining. So there's kind of a battle going on to influence public opinion. Because it's very easy for the people of the entire nation to get behind the state and say, what's wrong with those ignorant rural people? They're anti-development. And those are the discourses and the things that we see in the mainstream media. So in this context, the Amidiba Crisis Committee has decided to take a much more proactive stance and sort of shift from managing conflict and putting out fires to really trying to develop and promote their own sustainable, equitable livelihoods. And that's in part what we're doing with the exhibit, which we co-curated. Nordlane Butuma, who is the spokeswoman of the Amidiba Crisis Committee, and I chose these pictures together, wrote the text together, and as an engaged scholar, I should share that I don't publish anything or produce anything without the community's consent and their blessing. So that brings us to, I wanted to mention this novel by Zeig Da, Heart of Redness. Mm-hmm. So this is actually really, really an important book. It was published in 2000 or 2001. Redness refers to, it's sort of a double entendre of redness, the ochre that people paint their faces with, women mostly, because women are doing most of the work in the fields, as a natural sunscreen. And you can actually see it in one of the photos on the wall, the woman carrying the uduli, the grass on her head, and also the women harvesting the amadumbe, the sweet potatoes, are covered in ochre. And this book is written in a magic realism style that really embraces the whole indigenous cosmology and non-linearity of time. So the book weaves between past and present colonial times when the British first arrived, and present day, or rather not present day, but contemporary to that time, around the time when the Wild Coast Sun Casino was built on stolen customary land. And the story is about the community trying, the battle, the debate over whether the community wants or needs development all around this casino. That book could not have been more prescient. You could take the word casino out and replace it with mine, and it would be an exact retelling of what's going on now. I don't know how Zeig knew that, but he did, and it's a fabulous book. I recommend reading it. A little bit about the project context. Here's our first map. I was already working in the community on kind of other things. That we were doing a visioning exercise, because we found out at the time that the municipality of Mbizana, which is the local district, had produced a local spatial development plan. This is a map from the last page, the Spatial Development Framework Plan, that actually shows and you can't see because it's not very clear, but the N2 highway, the contested coastal route, it's there. It's one of those dash lines sort of at the top that goes, you can't really see very well, but it goes near Sagidi. And this sort of, if I move my cursor's not showing. I'll get up and show you. This little strip of red here, these are where the mineral sands are. And it says here, mines, okay? No permission has been given for mining. We know that the community has rejected it. But they just kind of went ahead and did it. And the community found out, and they have since launched legal action against this plan, which is not only unconstitutional but completely illegal. And we became aware of this while I was there and decided, why don't we do our own community's, people's local spatial development plan? And that's how the idea of mapping and this project was actually born. So I was made aware at the time that a woman who we call Sis Makoma, who works for EarthLife Africa, was already doing a mapping project. They were calling it eco-mapping, and they were doing it up in Limpopo province to try and help communities mobilize for the meaningless consultations that were coming their way about a Chinese project called the Mercado Musina Special Economic Zone. And these special economic zones are basically just zones of rape and pillage where there are no regulations, there's no legislation, nothing in effect. Factories, sites of industrial processing are built, coal smelting, all the things that you would ever not want to happen in one place, completely unfettered. So we arranged a call with Makoma because Nantle wasn't really familiar with mapping, wasn't really sure what I was proposing. And so we had this call, and at the end of it, Nantle was very, very keen. She's like, actually, we need to do this. So, I mean, from her perspective, from the Amadiba Crisis Committee, the mapping was appealing because it would enable intergenerational storytelling in a community where mining companies and a corrupt chief were really effectively dividing families, not just the community, and co-opting younger people, especially men, promising jobs and untold wealth. But it was also an opportunity for sharing indigenous knowledge and histories. Across the 6 villages of Xolobeni, which are really far spread out, like they're spread out across 300K, where roads are often, inaccessible, washed out, eroded. When the community holds their monthly meetings at Komkulu, which is the great place, it's basically the seat of traditional power, people will walk for 6 hours to get there. And then they will walk home, and whoever can hitch will. And then from a research point of view, this is interesting for lots of reasons. For us as social sustainability scientists, human geographers, political ecologists, lots of sites of archaeological and historical and cultural importance, and of course the biodiversity, and land use. So there's a lot to study for academics who are interested. So it just made sense to do this project. So we decided that we would together produce a set of analog and digital maps that would serve the community and hopefully their allies, because there are other communities fighting similar battles not too far away. But at the same time would allow us to co-produce data that would be interesting for different social sustainability science researchers and those of us doing engaged research. So I'm not going to get into the theory. I'm quite happy that this is one of those occasions where I don't need to dive too deep. But this is just so that there is some. The usual suspects, Peluso, critical digital counter mapping and critical cartographies. Data justice is actually quite important now in the age of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which the South African state thinks is going to be the next silver bullet that is going to allow the nation to leapfrog out of poverty. So using data as counter-tactic and tactic for envisioning alternative futures. And underpinning all of this is engaged scholarship. We're not pretending to be objective at all. The researchers that are involved in this project support the community implicitly and explicitly. We follow the principle of engaged scholarship, so collaboration by sharing control over agendas, processes, and how it informs the search for just solutions. How are we doing the mapping? I'll share a little bit about the stages and where we're at and what we've found so far. So what we started with were workshops for map drawing and storytelling, and we had particular framing questions. We focused our mapping on the past, the present, and the future. The first day was working with mainly elders. We asked them to show what they wanted future generations to know and to pass on about life on the land. So those were the conversations that the elders had, but the groups were also mixed with youngers as well because of literacy issues. As Notley told me in the beginning, a pen is the enemy to most elders, some of them who survived the Ponderland revolts. But the funny thing was, when we got started, we were all a little bit nervous. Are they not going to want to write? We're not using twigs and leaves or sticks and sand. And within about 10 minutes, they were fighting each other for the pen, going, I can draw a better cow than that. So that was the point of relief when things took off. The second day was a mixed group, very few elders, mostly younger people and youth, focusing on the present. Show us what you value most about life in your village. And then in the afternoon, and this, I'll tell you why this was so packed, the same mixed group, show us what your ideal village would look like. And this is different from the approach of eco-mapping used by Makoma. With Makoma's community in Limpopo, they were asked to map, show how things will change once the special economic zone is built. Notley made it very clear she wanted to focus, this is a key strategy of the Amadiba Crisis Committee, we want to show hope and potential for scaling up our initiatives and a positive vision. So we changed the third question to what would your ideal vision look like, and kind of went back to the visioning exercise we'd started. So we did this for 2 days with the first round, the first set field visit we did was only 2 villages, and that was kind of a pilot. The next time we went back, we did the remaining 4 villages in one go. It was massive and it was terrifying, but somehow it worked. Makoma told us, you need 3 weeks to do this at least, maybe a couple of months. Notley told us, you have 2 days. Because people are busy and they're working on the land and they can't spare any more time than that. So we kind of went for it, and we didn't know what was going to happen, but it worked. At the end of day 2, we asked, similarly to what we're doing at the end of our map, how did this exercise make you feel? What did it make you think? And I've just included a couple of comments here. Now I know why I'm fighting for my land and the history of how the fight for the land began and who was involved in the fight in the past. Another elder said, the maps will show us that we know our land and we have all the things we need to survive. Gwede Mantashe, who is the Minister of Mining and Minerals, who is leading the assault on the Amadiba, can come, and we will show him that there is no space for his mine, and the smart city will not have any space as well. That's another top-down project that the state is coming with. And then somebody else said, I can use the map as a weapon in fighting for my land. And on this day, at that workshop, we named the project Maps Are Now Our Spears. After that, the second phase was what cartographers apparently call ground truthing. So we took the hand-drawn maps. You can kind of see, well, maybe not on the iPad screen. We took a picture of the hand-drawn maps of past, present, and future, and we got in the car and we went to those places with the GIS clicker thingy. I'm a social scientist. So we went around and visited the places and pressed the buttons and got the coordinates. At the same time, we, in parallel, went out with community cartographers and said, you told us in the workshop why these places are important. Will you please tell us now with a camera? So we started collecting the images and the videos that will eventually be embedded in the map that I can't show you today because it is literally like in some lab somewhere being built. So we went around to these places and we took photos, and along with the photos we'll have voice notes that we can hopefully embed somehow with the photos, or text notes. We'll probably do it in English and Isimpondo. And after that, we started building the map, so integrating different data sources from the community and beyond. And I'll talk a little bit about how we brought extra collaboration into that later. The next step will be when I go back, we'll have a workshop in Peter Maritzburg and bring the team of community cartographers together again to check the maps for accuracy, to identify gaps that need to be filled by one more trip into the field, to get the community to approve the map and also tell us how they want it to look and how they want it set up and for what purpose. So some may want the map to promote their local eco-tourism businesses. Another woman in the workshop said, I want to show it to Sanrel when they show up with their pegs the next time, to tell them to go home. So we have to work out really what the final product is going to be collectively. We have some idea, but it needs finessing. And then we'll do some more planning for dissemination and further collaboration and other partnerships. And then probably around the end of November, we will have like a launch party at Komkulu where we launch the maps and hand them out. But we're definitely not there yet. We don't have a map yet. I don't have anything to show you except for like something that looks like a Google Earth map with colorful blobs on it. So I thought I'd rather show nothing than that. But it's worth sharing what some of the challenges were and the surprises were that we encountered along the way. So I've already mentioned the challenge with the time frame. We had to do something in 2 days that people who have done it already recommend you take 2 months to do. We managed. Language, so I had a research assistant who speaks isiZulu, but not Isimpondo, which is kind of a dialect of Zulu and Xhosa together. So there was a lot of asking people to repeat things or triangulate things, or then going to Nontle, who is the leader of a movement, and say, sorry to bother you, I know you're dealing with that, but can you tell me what the community meant about this thing they call Anaconda Steel Pit? Like there's just some stuff that when you're in the deep rural area, even having someone who speaks an Nguni language can't help you figure out. And then Wi-Fi access became an issue. There is Wi-Fi in many of the villages of Xolobeni, but not in all areas. Some parts are off the grid that way. And what we wanted to do when we found out it existed, there's an app called Ethno Ally for mapping. It probably is amazing in the global north where there's always Wi-Fi access. It only works online and it is fantastic. You can build a participatory map with Ethno Ally doing exactly what we're doing. You go to the place, you stand where you want to be, you take a picture, you can upload a voice note, you can film a video, you can do it all right there, which is great. But if you don't have Wi-Fi, it doesn't work. So we had to abandon that. And then we had to think about, how do we make a map truly owned and controlled by the community? How do we do this? Can we do this? And the answer was, it would be nice if we could, but we couldn't because of the Wi-Fi issue. So our way of working around that was, I went and I bought memory cards so that the local guides could fill their phones with all the data they wanted. Data meaning information, videos, pictures, and stuff like that. And then because the community won the land claims case that the Wild Coast Sun Casino is sitting on, they have the right to go onto the property and use the free Wi-Fi. So What we're doing now is the community mappers that have the memory cards are going out and taking the pictures and doing the things, and then they hand all their memory cards to one guy, and they're always passing by that casino anyway to go to town to get supplies. They pull in there, or he parks outside and he does all the emailing and sends me the stuff for free. So that was the best way that we could do it, and also a commitment from colleagues at UKZN for as long as they're there and have access to the equipment, that any updating, uploading, or support that needs to be done, we will always do it, even after the funds are gone, right? So it doesn't matter.
UKZN is the university.
Yes, that's the other. So I'm at University of Johannesburg, but I'm working with cartographers at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and that's Dr. Adrian Nell, who introduced me to Amber, and Romano Lottering. So yes, 6 degrees of separation all the way. And in terms of surprises, I think they definitely outweighed the challenges. We found a high level of technical skills and capacities in the community while I was there. I found out that there was a core group of individuals who had taken part in a participatory video program called Insight Share. I don't know if other people know of it. I know Amber does. So there were some great videographers and photographers already in the community. That was amazing. There were an incredible amount of opportunities for inter and transdisciplinary cooperation. Since we started this project, I've started working with Professor William Baynard at Oxford. He's a historian. He has extensive knowledge of the Pondo revolts and land use over the years. Who else? The cartographers, of course, at UKZN. Environmental sociologists, guides, social workers. I mean, this is such a hugely networked community with so much, I hate to use the phrase, but social capital. We're just bringing in data from everywhere. People who want to help the community are giving it to us, so we're able to integrate that. And then another surprise, and to the experts in the room who have presented different examples of mapping and who have done it already, you'll be like, yeah, how could you have not known this? But different perceptions of what actually constitutes a map. Like I said, I just stumbled into this project. I had no idea what I was doing. And so when we started this exercise and said, draw what's important to you, we assumed that everybody would draw something that looked like a map, which was not the case. Especially with the elders, they preferred to sort of make something that looks more like a legend, and then got up and talked about it. But when they told their stories, they told us where things were. So we were able, in listening to their stories, to make the maps that we needed to do to go out and do the ground truthing. But then something really, really funny happened in the second round of workshops in this village called Ntolani. We sat down with the hand-drawn map, and then we had our satellite map, and we were getting ready to start to plot the points, and then we realized nothing was where it was supposed to be, and we had this kind of like, oh shit moment, like, oh God, what's going on? And then we realized that the community had mapped everything as a mirror reflection. And this is the second image. This is the first map flipped over, and everything is in place and where it should be. And Adrian, my colleague, said, oh yeah, that's normal, that happens all the time. I was like, okay. But why? What was the process? And I really needed to, as a non-cartographer and a non-physical geographer, understand how could this happen? There had to be a logic to it, right? So we were sitting around in the rondel, and I picked up the map, and I held it over my head. And I saw they were mapping from the land up, right? Hold the map over your head, and what my colleague saw looking down was what a cartographer would expect to see. And what I saw was as if I'd been lying on the earth looking upward. It made total sense. It was a beautiful moment. So what are some of the other things that we found? I'll just share a few things with you before I finish. There was a story that the elders told about rondavels with no doors. And I do have pictures of them, but they're not clear enough. So this is the rondavel, the roundhouse. You can see one sort of far off in the distance and one sort of close up on the side with the sea in the background. And this is the story that was told. This is directly from the transcript of the workshop. The rondavels with no windows were one of the most special houses in the past. The women and children would be taken to the caves, as the caves were very sacred places for us as well for protection, and the men would stay to guard their house. This was actually in the time of story from the time of the British, sort of pre-Afrikaners. During the day they would go and hide in the forest, but at night they would come back and leave the door open, so they were always ready to attack. There is a story of a man who managed to kill 8 soldiers with just a spear when they entered his house. He was hiding behind the door in the rondavel, and he was able to see and attack anyone that got in his house. Even today you might find that we still have these rondavels. I did see 1 or 2. Then a sample of something from the present, even though this is the past. This is an archaeological site that just sort of is sitting out in the open air, completely. No barriers, no fences, nothing. We just sort of rocked up there. There's a picture on the wall of one of the flints held close up. I'll just play this little video here. This is Zamam Twa. He's a local guide and a local farmer. I don't know what the sound's going to sound like, and it's only 10 seconds.
Right, these are the Stone Age tools 500 to 300,000 years ago. Before people, they will live here and occupy the space here. They will use different tools and different hand axes. We all know that people before, they were big hands. That's why you find the hand axes, and it's easy to identify which hands people were used. Like this one was the right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Big hands.
Big hands. Big hands and right-handed man. So I asked him, who takes care of this place? Like, how do you protect it and make sure that everything stays where it is? And this was his response by WhatsApp. As people who live here, it is our responsibility to ensure that our archaeological sites are protected and conserved, so everyone have a role to play, so that every time that artifacts remain there. I really just copy-pasted that from the WhatsApp. I didn't edit it. I should have put Sikh in there, but I didn't. So that's Zama, and that's how the resources are maintained and protected, really, through a sense of well-defined communal obligations. I don't know why that's doing that. Okay, sorry. And then in terms of what was mapped for the future, I think there were a range of concerns that had to do with livelihoods, with biodiversity, but also social services that have basically been withheld by the state and said, when you accept mining, we will build you clinics, right? So on these maps, they plotted exactly where they wanted things. And this was, I think, the beauty of the exercise, is that these communities, they come together sort of for monthly meetings to deal with urgent issues and maybe less urgent sort of administrative issues. But they had never had a chance to sit together and plan their ideal community. So that was quite, I think they definitely appreciated that, and that came out in the feedback as well. So they talked about common kraals. A kraal is a pasture, an enclosed pasture area where the fences were falling down that they wanted repaired. Things like cattle dips, where you dip your cows to get all of the pests off of them before you take them to market. They wanted waste collection facilities and recycling, especially for their touristic sites. They wanted clinics, schools, and daycares, and they showed me on the map where they needed to go. They wanted colleges and schools that were suitable to the area. They didn't just want a university or a technical college. They wanted to learn horticulture, botany, and veterinary science so they could take care of their animals. And they were really, really quite distressed as a community about how when they send their youth off to university, they come back as geologists who want to mine and make money. So yeah, they had quite a go at me at being there from a university. It was very humbling. I didn't take it personally, but there were actually a lot of stories about how kids grew up being told by their parents, never go to school. It will ruin you. It will destroy our livelihoods and our culture. They wanted local access roads, they wanted markets for selling local goods, and they wanted cooperatives. And this is called Sikombe Bay. It's there's a river, there's the Sikombe River, and that is the site where they would like to build a fisheries cooperative. That's also a site that they told a really interesting story about how there are people in Xolobeni who are descended from Scottish colonists. And those descendants, I mean, everybody kind of knows who they are, and nobody really remembers who the Scots person was. But there is a story about how when a ship crashed, 'cause lots of ships get wrecked there, that being the Wild Coast, it's not an accident, that name. When a ship landed and crashed, the people of Xolobeni went out and rescued them and were given a cow because they had cattle on board. And so that's where that sort of Scottish line of descent comes. These are the stories that came out that didn't come out in the workshop, that came out when we were just there in the car with the cameras and people remembered. Also, a huge potential for local economic development is the farming and processing of dacha, or marijuana. And this is quite important because the state, in its Eastern Seaboard Development Plan, another plan made without community consent, contains and plans and foresees the legalization, or at least the legalization of marijuana. And local people have been growing weed in their gardens since the beginning of time. And during apartheid and after, the government would drop herbicide from airplanes to destroy people's crops, to destroy their livelihoods, to make people more dependent on mining. They still get harassed for growing small amounts of weed, and they just sell it to sort of middlemen for not very much from Durban. But what the state is trying to do now is create a weed industry, and they are making licenses very, very expensive and handing them out to politically connected, corrupt local elites, and not allowing locals to have these licenses, which is, yes, hugely unfair and problematic, and will probably be part of the ACC lobbying campaign as well. And there are proposals out there actually to turn that area of Umgungundlovu into a community-owned cooperative weed growing zone. Like, if you're going to legalize weed, that be the growing area. That and some other area. This is something that the community is considering. I'm not sure they want all the trappings that go along with marijuana tourism, because I think that's a different kind of tourism than ecotourism, and that's going to bring other issues. But it's an option and something that could work if it was guided from the bottom up and very carefully thought out. Sorry. So what have I and my colleagues learned so far from this? Well, our aim was to seek out and document sustainable, productive rural livelihoods, and we just found commoning everywhere, and we weren't even looking for it, right? And I don't think that the community sees things in terms of commons or commoning at all. But I think as academics we're allowed to take a little bit of license if it's for a good outcome, and there are no objections from the community side. As far as Nantes is concerned, any way that we can create dialogue around the alternatives that are being put forth by the community, then yeah, we can call it commoning. I think there's a lot to be learned by scholars and activists and scholar activists, if that dividing line even really still exists anymore, about Xolobeni as a concrete utopia. It's not perfect, and we don't mean to idealize their rural society and life. It is fraught as hell. But to date, the community hasn't been given a chance to try and make a go of it on its own. At least not with any support from the state. For anyone thinking about about participatory mapping, where we called this, I've kind of left the jargon out, but we're calling it participatory digital counter mapping because of the online interactive aspect. The community needs always have to take priority. They were at the heart of the proposal. We didn't design a mapping project that would be great for social scientists and then include the community as an add-on. It began with the community and the strategic needs of the Amadiba Crisis Committee. You need to be prepared to question all your assumptions, especially scholarly assumptions about what a map is, what it should look like, what it should be for, and create that space for joint reflection all the way through. Kind of like the communication as the success, and the more you meet, the better the commons works, right? Trust is essential. Somebody actually, when we were looking for this thing that somebody told us was the Anaconda steel place, we didn't know what we were looking for. I'm still not even sure what we found. But what we were told was, we will show you where it is if you don't mine it. And I probably couldn't have just rocked up there without having spent a couple of years in the area already and had people take me to all of these sacred and rich places. And then, of course, the issue of power and data justice. The community in the end will decide what gets shown on the map and what doesn't, based on their assessment of risks and opportunities. Their slogan, and that of many other Indigenous peoples, is nothing about us without us. So I think as an academic, which is kind of what I am right now, speaking to those of my ilk, I think we can and should, as engaged scholars, amplify the successes that were out there, but it's also really important to understand the limits, to see how and whether and under what circumstances commoning is scalable, upward, outward, replicable, and how we can help widen the margins in which alternatives can thrive. I don't think we have any delusions in our department about single-handedly overthrowing capitalism in the Eastern Cape. But if we can contribute to making alternatives more appealing and generate some faith in the general public that there is an alternative to mining instead of the current hegemonic destructive paradigm, then I think we'll be happy with those outcomes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.